Ready? First and foremost, I want to thank everybody for their time today. I'm actually really excited about this spilling the beans. I know I'm in marketing and I'm not really a tech geek, but I know enough to be dangerous. And every now and then, I feel like we stumble across a technology where I'm like, that's really cool. And that's a game changer. And I feel like Endpoint Zero Trust, for me personally, falls in that category. So I'm so happy that people are here learning about this because, quite frankly, the stories that I've heard of the people who have implemented this solution, that inspires me. That makes me a little bit hopeful. I know that we're never going to get rid of the bad actors, and I know that we're always going to be fighting this little game, right? But for me, I felt like this was a win for the good guys. And so I am so excited. We have a super great group of people today. We've got Dean Sheely, Caleb Skansen, Andy Bergeron. Those are our internal folks. I love our people. I think we have the best people on earth. And so I'm super excited about this lineup. Dean Sheely, our awesome Spilling the Beans host, thank you for being here again. Thank you for committing to this summer Spilling the Beans series, because I genuinely feel that the subject matter that we have discussed and that we're going to continue to discuss, including, the next one that we're going to have in September of building a strong security-minded culture. I think this is just such a really impactful thing that we really want to spill the beans on, quite frankly, because again, this was the one technology where I was like, this is a game changer. This is super cool. So without further ado, Dean, I'll let you get started.
Sounds good. And maybe I should get the PowerPoint thing ready now. It always takes me a second to do the screen thing, but we'll probably do about 10, 15 minutes of a PowerPoint, and then we're going to lead into a good 25, 30 minutes of just kind of an organic discussion and then a Q&A. So let me get the screen thing figured out. And then I'll have to share that. So hold on, folks. And then Brandy, I always ask you if you can see the shared PowerPoint, okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay, yeah, sounds great. And just to kind of ride Brandy's tailcoats here a little bit, spilling the beans, I think everybody knows what that's about. Just a brutal, honest, organic conversation where we try to express or show conversations and ideas that you would have over a cup of coffee or a beer after work, or what I call parking lot conversations, where just, kind of the brutal truth comes out. So that's kind of the philosophy behind spilling the beans. We kind of have some unwritten rules when it comes to spilling the beans, and one of those is that we usually don't talk about products. However, today, we're going to talk about the philosophy and the methodology of whatnot behind Zero Trust, but it's going to be product related. So I just wanted to bring that out, to be forthcoming, so you don't think you're getting, surprised or whatever. And anyway, if that doesn't align with what you want to hear today, I just wanted to bring that up. And yeah, we're gonna get into the philosophy of Zero Trust in this product. And I hope you'll stick around through the entire presentation, especially to hear the panel discussion about, some real world stories and, nuances of the application. But like Brandy said, it's super exciting. If you ever want to, we've all heard of like disruptive products or products that we've never quite seen in the industry before. This is definitely one of those. And as we interface with the manufacturer of this product, Caleb and I have met the CEO and stuff. They're in conversations with Gartner all the time, and Gartner doesn't even know how to categorize this product. And I think you'll kind of understand as we go through this. So yeah, we'll probably use the whole 45, 50 minutes today. So yeah, spilling the beans. I'm Dean here. We got Caleb, Andy. We'll get into their different roles, but all security professionals, folks that I deeply respect and learn from every day. And then I wanted to throw, and the three of us will present today. I want to throw a picture of Peyton up here. She's part of the team. She won't be presenting today, but she's just critical to everything that we do. And I just wanted to give a shout out to her, just to show respect and appreciation to how she contributes to all of this. And, in short, I'm a security consultant, a technology servant, here to, always be an advocate of our customers. We got Caleb here, one of our smart services managers, specifically around security, but I don't want to pigeonhole him into that because he's such a well-rounded engineer. We have Andy, High Point Networks, we're a technology company, but we actually have an internal IT team that runs things. And of course, Andy is dealing with security stuff every day. He's our internal IT manager. And then we have Peyton down here, who's our smart services engagement manager, so huge respect there. I'm going to do the PowerPoint here for like 10 or 15 minutes to kind of set the stage and also kind of explain, how I view Zero Trust and try to show you visually what this product does. Sometimes we have a hard time explaining it just verbally. Sometimes we show the user interface and it's so rich and dynamic and so many buttons and stuff. Not that it's complicated, but it just does so many things that sometimes the spirit of what the solution does is lost in that. So I'm gonna if I had crayons, I would draw a picture. So this is just above crayons, but try to express what the solution does. Then after my 10 or 15 minutes of chatting, the three of us are going to have an organic discussion. And what I mean by that is we've never practiced this. That's another unwritten rule of spilling the beans. What you're going to hear today is very authentic and off the cuff. We'll talk a little bit about tooling, use cases, some real world stories. And it'd be interesting to get Caleb and Andy's perspective on how High Point uses this Endpoint Zero Trust product. We have to choose products, we have to pay for them just like everybody else. And, how did we come to the decision to do that and kind of the rollout and any pain points we had and then successes as well. Okay. All right, let's roll here. Oh yeah, then we're going to end with a Q&A. Sometimes those are 2 or 3 minutes long. We had one that went 25 minutes. So, we'll see how that goes. Okay, Zero Trust definition, just to get everybody on the same page. And this is not my definition of Zero Trust. This is actually put out there by NIST. But Zero Trust is a term for an evolving set of cybersecurity paradigms. And what's funny is when we look at products from a bunch of different vendors, whether it's network or computer storage, everybody focuses on the paradigm, and it's really hard to see a product, where the rubber hits the road, but I think you're going to see that today. But security paradigms that move defenses from static network-based perimeters, right, like we've been doing for the last 25 years with, the firewall and whatnot, to focus on users. Users can be people. Users can also be devices, I think, assets and other resources, specifically data. So furthermore, infrastructure has grown increasingly complex, especially as a result of the cloud and COVID and everything else. So a single business may operate several internal networks, remote offices with their own local infrastructure, remote and now mobile is in place, cloud services. So this complexity has outstripped legacy methods of perimeter-based network security, right? Where don't trust anything on the outside of the perimeter and trust everything on the inside of the perimeter, right? So perimeter-based network security has also been shown to be insufficient. Since one attacker breached the perimeter, then they can move laterally and everything else. And this is not, listen carefully, this is not to knock network security. Network security is absolutely critical. Continue to do it, continue to concentrate on it, but also give an equal amount of time to kind of these new zero trust philosophies. Okay, so very kindly speaking, again, to set the stage today, sometimes when people hear this endpoint zero trust term, they think that we're talking about endpoint network access control or zero trust network. And believe me, there's some fantastic methods and products, like ClearPass and so forth, that will not allow a device on the network unless, certain conditions are met. And if you're in the middle of a project like that, I mean, do it all day long. It's absolutely critical. Or zero trust network, right, where you're doing a lot of microsegmentation within the LAN, and maybe there's firewalls there, layer 7 that are making decisions on behavior. If you're doing those today, continue to do them. So just graphically, let's show what we've been doing for the last 25 years. Is you have a network and you put a perimeter behind it, stop, go. So this could be traditional network access control where you're not allowing devices on the LAN or up on the WAN, depending on conditions, right? This could be a firewall at the edge. It could be something like ClearPass internally, where you're stop and go, depending on conditions. So now we're going to shift over to endpoint zero trust. And I think you'll be able to see the contrast here. Okay. So we're going to take a machine and kind of flip it on its side, because the endpoint zero trust operation, methodology, function, or whatever you want to call it, actually takes place within the endpoint, within the node. And not that there's not network controls as a part of the solution, but this is very much endpoint control. And there's a number of controls that we'll get into here. But the first significant one is kind of this golden holy grail, if you will, of endpoint security, which is application whitelisting. And a number of companies have tried to do this over time. And in my opinion, pretty much all of them have come short or failed. But let's talk about application whitelisting in regards to the EZT platform. So on an endpoint, we have a whole bunch of different, let's call it high level applications that we might use, like the Office Suite or, Photoshop or 7-Zip or whatever it may be. In addition to that, the operating system, and we'll just take Windows here, but the EZT platform works on Macintosh as well. We love Apple products. We love Linux products. Linux isn't there quite yet, but it's like, honestly, spilling the beans. It's coming any day, any week now. But with the Windows operating system, there's a shocking amount of internal applications, right? Like PowerShell, management tools, the event scheduler, task scheduler. You can zip files now as a part of the, operating system. PowerShell can encrypt, and I mean, on and on and on and on. And then there's a million DLLs out there and other things like that. So those have to be whitelisted as well. So the first part of the EZT solution, and we'll get into this more in our organic conversation, but there's a software inventory that takes place. And it's literally every file on that endpoint, whether it's an executable or a document or a DLL or anything in between, an inventory of that. And then a learning phase takes place, which is about 20 days long, 21 days long. We'll get into that. But the zero trust part of it is literally, and this is metaphorically, deny everything by default, period. Right? This is zero trust. It's almost like putting a mandatory access control layer on top of the endpoint, whether that be, Windows or Mac OS. So I'm going to put some, red little, what do I want to call them? They're not stop signs, but just, it's like Hollywood squares or something, that nothing is trusted out there. Nothing is allowed to run. Okay. So as a part of this learning process, let's say this is like an employee's endpoint, and it can be, a workstation or a server, doesn't matter. Let's say this is a business office computer. Obviously, the executables, the DLLs, PowerShell, command line, C script, Win32, the WMI, other things like that need to function in order for the operating system, to even function. And we can get into, there's this term called built-in that we'll talk about during our conversation, but those things are well documented. They're trusted. There's search. There's publisher identification, and then there's SHA-256 hashes and so forth to make sure that those are legit. C script and stuff. Okay, now we have like literal applications. So as the employee begins to use their machine over this 21-day learning period, it's going to say, hey, this end user, uses OneDrive. Not only do they use it, but here's the files that are associated with it. Here's the processes that are spawned because of it. If it reaches out to the internet, which it does, obviously, here's the connection, here's the, IPs that it usually uses, so forth and so on. So every nth degree of the application is captured during this period. Traditional, your office things, maybe Power BI, and then even services like the Windows Print Spooler, Task Scheduler, WMI, any other built-in tools like that, right? Then, as this learning period is happening, the platform gives policy suggestions based on what it's found, how applications interact with each other, storage that it accesses, file types that it accesses, network resources on the LAN or the WAN that it reaches out to. Policy suggestions are made. Then the end user, with the help of HighPoint Networks, can review those policy suggestions, kind of fine tune them, and that eventually becomes an allow list. And in addition to allow list, there's ring fencing and storage control and network control and a bunch of other things. But basically, you now have a trusted list, a whitelist. And we'll get into, if a piece of malware jumps on the machine, how that is just stopped, period. Just because it's not on the list. I mean, it's not even evaluated. It's just if it's not on the list, it doesn't run, period, full stop. Adjustments can be made. Let's say we are now switching to a marketing computer. So the same learning process takes place, from scratch usually, but, simple adjustments are made where, hey, maybe marketing doesn't need Power BI, but they need Photoshop. Maybe they need 7-zip as well, because they need to zip up, these large video files or graphic files or whatever it may be. There are also, if an end user tries to run an application that's not on their whitelist, for example, maybe marketing does need Power BI so they can see where sales are happening and not, and how to, craft a campaign. There's a workflow built into the EZT platform to request application access, to request the ability to elevate an account to like administrator, and we'll get into that as well. And any other little nuances that come along as well. Obviously, those requests can be approved, they can be denied. There's a full audit of that happening. The approval or the access can be granted, to very fine grain, a user or a group. Access can be granted for a very small period of time or persistently, and anywhere in between. So here's, just an example of a piece of malware now trying to get onto the computer. And I mean, we don't need to belabor this, but if that piece of malware isn't on the allow list, it doesn't run, like, period. And we're going to get into the difference between, traditional EDR and zero trust. But I mean, at a very high level, EDR is going to try to make a judgment call on whether that executable is, trusted or not. There's a decision that is made. So it's not deny by default, which zero trust is. It's make a judgment call, kind of trust it, and then let it run, as opposed to don't trust it and then make a decision. So you can kind of see the philosophical differences there, which is a core component of the solution. Okay, the next major component is application ring fencing. And what that means is, okay, we have all of our apps here, just in our demonstration, and there's a green square around them to show that they're trusted. Okay. But what ring fencing does is it understands the behavior of the application. It understands other files it may reach out to. And if for whatever reason something does get compromised, it puts guardrails around the app or the service in order to control the way that infected thing interacts with other applications. So we have the whitelisting, the allow listing, and then the ring fencing to the nth degree understands how that application may interact with adjacent applications. So for example, we had the Windows Spooler nightmare that happened, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. Windows Spooler runs as system, which is even worse than local administrator or domain administrator, right? So usually when something gets infected, it runs within the security context of that user. So when Windows Print Spooler got hit, it just, had full control over the machine, but not with Endpoint Zero Trust. And we can get into Elevation, but one of the first things it tried to do is jump out to the internet for command and control, and then it was going to download, more malware like Metasploit or Meterpreter or something like that. Okay, so number one, should the Windows Print Spooler ever reach out to the internet? No. Okay, so that's that. Should the Windows Print Spooler ever reach out to PowerShell or the command line or cloud storage or the registry? No, like never. Okay, should it reach out to some DLLs? Yeah, probably. But as part of the learning process, it's gonna, realize which DLLs it's dependent on. Should it reach out to the local hard drive? Yeah, probably, because it needs to write event logs and stuff like that. Does it need to reach out to any other folders on the disk? Does it need to reach out to network share? Does it need to reach out to a USB drive or any other type of storage you could think about? Probably not. Does Print Spooler need to, zip files? No. So that's stopped. Does the Print Spooler need to print? Yes. So the crazy thing is, and I would never recommend this, but even as the Windows Print Spooler would be infected, it could in theory continue to perform its guardrailed purpose, which is to print wildly, right? Isn't that crazy? So anyway, more application ring fencing, PowerShell is a huge one. So how do we control that? We can definitely do that as well, out to the registry, out to the internet, out to disk, whatever it may be. I know somebody's going to ask the CrowdStrike question, could that have been controlled? This was a driver, one of those kind of micro updates to CrowdStrike. And at the time, there was no way to control or stop these little micro updates. I'm using the wrong term there. And by the way, we really respect CrowdStrike. There's no emotion or animosity there. But the Endpoint Zero Trust, through its storage control, could say, hey, CrowdStrike, we're not going to allow you to write anything to the driver's CrowdStrike directory until we approve it, right? So with the EZT platform, there would actually be a way to control updates to CrowdStrike. Okay, so we have the block list, we have the allow list, we have ring fencing. We have network control, which I didn't mention. We have storage control. There's elevation and other things. We can't mention all of them. Best way to see everything is a demo, and then you can see the user interface and whatnot. But as we're going through the learning mode, before we actually turn enforcement on, there's a period of time, you can do it at any time, but actually run a simulation mode where you can see if anything breaks, if there were dependencies that should have been allowed that were not allowed. So a lot of tweaking and refinement and so forth can happen before enforcement takes place. Now, for some of you old schoolers out there, I'm about 50 years old, so y'all remember this, that there's been some solutions in the past which kind of mimic what we're seeing today. And I don't think any of them exist today. The one that I had experience with in 2014, 2015, you'd go through a learning mode and then you'd flip the thing over to enforcement and it would just break everything. So this is a huge part of getting that refinement done. And when Highpoint first started evaluating this too good to be true solution, I had a significant role in that just because I was familiar with, another product that attempted this in 2015. And, one thing I was amazed about, I said, we're going to put this thing in enforcement mode and it's just going to destroy the network. And it didn't. And then there were some other things too, like policies persist even if an admin is logged on to a machine. And that was another significant thing for me. And then there's admin application hopping, which, maybe we'll get into that a little bit, but that's controlled as well. I just couldn't believe it when that happened. So this workflow that's built into the solution, right? If you have an executable that's blocked, like TeamViewer, you can request access. Let's pretend that we don't know what TeamViewer is. So we can put a little justification into why we need it and our email address, and then we can send that request off, right? So this is all done from an employee's machine. It's all built in. You don't even really need to do some like zero configuration for the workflow. It just works. It just goes to the admin or whoever is, approving apps like this. Here's what the administrator sees. This is just a fraction of it, but where the thing wants to run from, the hash, the username, what account it needs to run under, approval status. But the super cool thing, right, is that if you don't know what the file is or how it behaves or if it's trusted, I guess there's a virus total button there, but you can click on a button and a VDI environment is actually spun up for you. You can push the file up there. I'm not sure if that's done automatically or not. I just don't know. But, think about this as a sandbox environment. You start a learning mode on the sandbox machine. It's going to check virus total. Canary comes into play. It's going to give you everything that's going on from a system point of view, network point of view, the registry. It's going to look at the certificate. Then you get a full audit, that you can look at, evaluate it, download, make a decision on, hey, is this thing legit or not? Then you make your decision, you kind of close down that VDI and then you're off and running. So the point of this is just one click, and then you're into the VDI environment. Really quick elevation control before we get into the organic discussion with Caleb and Brandy. Some apps, require admin access. Like for those of you that use QuickBooks or whatever else, maybe it's a medical application, who knows? Like the updater for QuickBooks always has to run as an admin, right? Who knows why? Now, the way that elevation control can work within the EZT platform. And again, a request can be made for elevation to happen, but the executable is elevated, not the user. Because if the user is elevated, then they have, full access to everything on that machine, whether it be an endpoint or whether it be a server. But if we just give the application the ability to run as admin, then it does what it needs to do. And when it's done or based on a period of time, that admin access is taken away. So that's really a cool thing. And just to show a fraction of the user interface, which is so nice, and it gives the call schedule a demo to see it. But the green means that it's on our allow list. The little yellow thing with the fence there means it's ring fenced. And then the blue button there, I believe, means that QuickBooks is elevated for the time being. And it can be elevated persistently. A lot of developers are like, hey, I need to, run Visual Studio as admin or whatever else. Well, just run the app as admin. Maybe don't run the user as admin, or at least kind of play with that. You know what I mean? What do we have left here? There's no admin application hopping. This is kind of cool for the nerds on the phone. I mean, you'll get this, but let's say we're going to elevate the PowerShell application because we need to, run some command or query. We need to take a inventory of the machine. So we invoke a WMI method or commandlet or whatever, you get the point. So PowerShell, the app is elevated, but me, the user, is not elevated. So if I go into the shell and I type in like, who am I, it gives me my name. And this is just an example here. If I then try to start an application from the elevated PowerShell, so we're going to start Outlook, you can see now that Outlook is running as me. It's not running as admin. So if local admin, believe it or not, is given to the user, then the user opens the shell, and then an application is instantiated as that user. Then that application, like Outlook, will actually execute as admin. So I love that the entitlement hopping, the permission hopping does not take place within the EZT platform. I think that's kind of miraculous. So review, we have the allow listing, ring fencing, elevation control, the VDI testing environment, storage control, network control. We got into the workflow a little bit, and there's a few other things that the platform does that's absolutely incredible. For example, as you're taking an application inventory, it's even aware of where applications are developed, China, who is it significantly funded by, Russia, then you may not want to, allow that application into your environment. I've never seen anything like that. So I think that's super cool. Okay. Rapid growth. Who's using this platform? Again, it's very new, but the United States Navy, major shipping point. There's a city, over 2 million residents, major US airline, been using it for about a year. Couple NBA teams, Division I university. The CEO, who we know personally, just because we got into this so early, is a personal friend with a few of us. He is a developer and a hacker, and he's very much, not only the CEO, but very much into product development still today and in vision. So that's super cool. Okay, sorry I got kind of chatty there. We'll probably go the full hour, if not a little bit more. We want to take our time here to hear from the guys that are really using the thing day in, day out. So we have Caleb and Andy that we'll bring into the conversation here. So I'm going to stop my presentation and stop sharing and see if we can get those guys back into the teams. Okay, Brandy, can you see the people on the teams now? Or maybe she took off. Caleb, can you
Yep.
can you see us?
You're still sharing your screen, Dean.
Oh, okay. Thanks, man. Stop sharing.
There you go.
There, how's that?
There you
Cool.
go.
Thanks, man. So, Caleb, I have some ideas of maybe where to start this little panel discussion, but I don't want to step on your toes. Anything I missed there or anything that pops out to you as to how you'd maybe want to start this?
I guess you did a pretty good job with the overview. I think it's important to note that that learning mode is very important. We see, I think that's the huge market differentiator. Dean was talking about competing products where they don't have that option. So basically, you have to manually identify every single component that's used by that software. What is very nice about the solution is the fact that we can catalog every single file, every single DLL, every single executable that's called or used by it, and then create policies around that so that when you do go into enforcement mode, you're not like, well, did I get everything? You know you got everything because you learned what that application does. Consequently, that lends a lot when you start going into ring fencing, which allows you to determine what an application is able to interact with. Dean touched on that a little bit, but the idea behind that is the fact that actually, I'll use Dean, that link I sent you today. When I'll go back a couple years, 3 years now, Dean and I were first testing this, and we were looking through what its capabilities are. One of the things that we noticed very early on, using the unified audit, which touches or tracks every single touch or every single change that's made on the machine and every single interaction, we noticed that Chrome was reaching out and basically cataloging user directories, shared folders. Did keep me honest. What else did we see? There was a bunch of stuff where it was like, why would Chrome need to catalog that? What is Google actually doing here? And consequently, today I jumped on LinkedIn this morning when I woke up, as I always do, and I look at what's been happening over the last 24 hours, or I don't know. I have a busy day, so I don't really get to look at LinkedIn during the day. So I have to look at what happened yesterday. But I think it was yesterday, Vice actually had an article about how Chrome is actually scanning endpoints, and I was like, well, I thought this was common knowledge. Dean and I have known about this for a long time. So I think what was very interesting about that was the fact that we were able to define what Chrome needs to touch. I mean, technically, I don't see any reason why Chrome would need to go anywhere but your downloads, maybe, so that it can write to the downloads if you're downloading a file, and interact with the other executables that it needs to use to launch and run and function. So when you write that policy, you've effectively chopped off Google's ability to see what's in the machine, what's running, or excuse me, what files exist, even if it's not necessarily opening them, it may be cataloging them, which is kind of weird. I really don't know what their intention is there. But with that ring fencing, we're actually able to define what Chrome can and can't do. And we found that to be highly valuable. If you guys are curious what I'm talking about, maybe I'll go grab that link and throw it in the chat. But I think that's pretty interesting to me because, like I said, when Dean and I first started testing this, we were kind of like, well, that's weird. And so now seeing it come out on Vice, what's it been, Dean? 2.5, 3 years later, I'm like, I thought this was common knowledge.
Yeah. To study what an application does, I mean, absolutely. And you can control it and ring fence it down to the nth degree. And we're not, bashing on Chrome. I think it's a fantastic browser, but you'll get extensions all the time, and sometimes they just almost magically appear. I mean, I'm sure I'm clicking on something to get an extension, but if those things, even a browser extension, aren't on the allow list, they don't run, right? And like Caleb said, because of the ring fencing, you can control how it interacts with other applications. And then just to give an example of the power of the control, like let's just take Photoshop, for example. You can just, down to the file level, you can say Photoshop, you can only interact with certain file types, right? I mean, JPEGs or PNGs or the PSD, I don't know what the Photoshop extension is, but only that. Like Photoshop, you can't access Excel files or CSV files or, whatever else it may be. So you can really even lock down to the file type that application interacts with. And then also, does Photoshop have any reason to reach out to the internet? No. I mean, there's the Creative Cloud piece that I think does the updating and the downloading, but the actual application, does it have their, I don't know. Or if it reaches out to the internet, it's just to publish things to YouTube, Facebook, other social media, stuff like that, or maybe allow cloud storage. So I mean, to the nth degree, you can control it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I think it'd be important to note there that we're not just talking about blocking internet wholesale for these applications. I mean, to Dean's point, Creative Cloud and Photoshop do need to reach out. Photoshop needs to verify licensing, and Creative Cloud needs to download updates or fonts and assets, etc. And so with the solution, we have an add-on for network control, which Dean touched on a little bit. But even just in the native platform itself, we have the ability to define what IP addresses it can reach out to. So if we have a list of addresses that we know Creative Cloud should be using or blocks, we can add those and say you can communicate with these, but no one else. And therefore, you've reduced your attack surface significantly. If for some reason there was as Dean was talking about, the print spooler nightmare, if there was some vulnerability for Creative Cloud or Photoshop where it was actually to get breached and it was trying to reach out to command and control. Now, it is important to back up. Dean touched on this earlier. There should be two levels of control here in my mind. Your firewall at the network level should also be looking out for traffic to your command and control servers, or at least have a list of known command and control actors. Now, there are two, I think I might be taking us a little off course here, but there's two concepts here that I want to touch on. And one is the firewall is looking for known CNC actions or known malicious actors, etc. Whereas on the flip side, with what we've done from a zero trust perspective, is we've said you can only go here, you can't go anywhere else. So the command and control addresses are kind of whatever. But at the same time, if for some reason maybe an Adobe server, an Adobe address, or something bad happened at Adobe corporate, you've got supply chain attacks, we would still have visibility into those actions. And again, even if there was that supply chain attack and a Adobe address or an Adobe server was being used for command and control, we've already defined what Photoshop can and can't do. So great, they got access. They can open PSDs and they can update Creative Cloud. They can't do anything else. We've already said the only thing that you can do is your day-to-day function. Oh well, I mean that sounds very, very glib.
I'm hearing you, and this is a little theatrical, audience. This is a little theatrical, but like if an application gets owned, so what? Now, please. That's theatrical.
Let's back off that one a little bit, Dean.
But
don't take that approach. We definitely want to fix the vulnerabilities.
Yeah, that's theatrical, but it's like, how's it going to move laterally? Yeah, I mean, you set the network control to do that. How's it going to write out to storage? How's it going to access the internet? How is it going to elevate? How is it going to, access an adjacent application? It's a completely different mindset than, EDR, which gotta have EDR. We love EDR, but it's a completely different approach than what we've seen for the last 25 years. So the purpose of being theatrical like that is because I don't think you'll ever forget that I said that, and just to kind of put those paradigms, those capabilities into place. That was the reason for that.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that EDR is looking for a couple of different criteria that don't necessarily play, and this is why you would need both. We've got control on one side, and we've got detection on the other, endpoint detection and response versus control. With EDR, and the reason that we recommend both is we are all human. We write infallible policies. If only that were true. We write fallible policies, and therefore we always want to have that security onion perspective where we have multiple layers to capture or to potentially bolster us where we may have made mistakes. So I want to touch on the control versus detection a little bit. So endpoint detection response is looking for specific behaviors, specific threats, specific static files, specific actions, etc., and then taking actions to block those. Conversely, with zero trust, what we've done is we've said that you can't do anything beyond what you do on a daily basis. We've defined what daily or what normal operation is. Anything outside of normal operation isn't allowed. Full stop. the idea here is, and I was kind of making light of the fallible policies because we are all human. There's a possibility that you could potentially accidentally add a policy that may have a hole. And the idea behind EDR and having both of these, if for some reason there's a misconfiguration that does get exploited, you still have the ability to capture that on the EDR side. So we're not recommending this as a full replacement for EDR. We're recommending this as another layer to your security stack.
Yeah, well said, Caleb. Hey, we are going to go long today, folks. Sorry, I got a little chatty. My bad. There is a recording of this. I mean, we're going to continue this conversation. It's just going to go along. But if you have to, jet at 12, please know this is going to be published somewhere. We'll let you know that you can come back and watch the end if you have to jet. Hey, I want to bring Andy into the conversation, Caleb. Because again, High Point Networks chose to bring this on as a product. We don't always bring all products on board, which we sell, and we have to pay for them just like everybody else. So we look at, return on investment and, risk reduction and things like that. So, Andy is kind of been here. Andy's kind of a new employee, but I think he's been here long enough. And Caleb, I mean, you two obviously were here from the beginning of Threat Locker, but Andy, I don't want to lead the conversation if you want to go somewhere else, but just interested in the onboarding process, kind of the good, the bad, the ugly, enforcement mode, things that want to be tweaked. And then even when we're in enforcement mode, if additional applications want to be brought in, do you do learning mode again? Just kind of the day in the life of an EZT user, if you would, administrator.
It's been an adventure. There's a lot of work to it. There's no doubt. Learning mode is great because it helps us a great deal identify everything that's on all these machines and help us figure out where we want to go. One of the biggest things we did internally was we needed to define kind of some base tools that people were going to be using. What do people need on their day-to-day? So during learning mode, we could look at those devices that were using those specific tools and make sure that we wrote policy around those tools that would work for our users, and they could do their day-to-day jobs without interruption. Sometimes people didn't like what those tool sets were and wanted to use their own, and that's where Threat Locker also comes in handy, where you can kind of stop shadow IT. And us being an IT company, every engineer kind of has their own idea about what the tools they want to use and how they want to use it. And this helps us control what's coming into our environment. And we might have somebody bring something in that wasn't really paying attention to what they were bringing in, and cause all kinds of problems. And that put a stop to any of those kind of possibilities. So far, it's been a great tool.
I think one thing that was also very interesting for, I'll say myself and probably you, Andy, was seeing some of the tools. Dean touched on it briefly, but all of, or 80-90% of the tools and applications out there have been classified and categorized as far as where they're developed, where the money comes from to develop them, if there's a nation state that has a hand in the pot, so to speak, et cetera. And one of the things that I think that was very eye-opening, because I was heavily involved in High Point's onboarding to the solution, is how many applications we had that we didn't realize were actually sponsored by nation states. And that isn't to throw bad light at High Point. We weren't using like nefarious tools or anything like that, but 7-zip, let's take that for illustration. That's actually heavily developed by nation state, and I will bet you most of the people in this call have that installed in the majority of their environment. So that was very eye-opening for us. I mean, there's a number of others that were like, oh, really? Interesting. And so that actually armed us with the tools to be able to say, we are not using that. We're going to use that. Or we need to, instead of use this TFTP server, use this one. That was actually an illustration we had this morning.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. It's going to be work. I mean, there's going to be people that want to bring new tools on, and you're going to have a way to onboard new tools. So we've developed kind of a policy around that as well. You don't want to lock yourself into, nope, this is what we're using, we're going to stay static, because that's just not how things work. Everybody wants to bring in something new as things evolve. So we have to have a way of doing that. So having a policy around it is key.
And I think that's important to note as well, is that we've actually established ITIL change control around the applications that we use. So if someone is bringing in a new application that maybe we haven't seen before, because again, everything is denied until there's a policy for it. If someone's bringing in an application that we may not have seen before, we have the ability to evaluate it, make sure that it's either up to par, or that there's no hidden language in the EULA that says if you're busted with it, you got to pay for it. Looking at you, Java. But we have a process where we can evaluate that application, and then we can throw an endpoint into learning mode to learn everything that goes into that application. We can then ring fence it, and now we're controlling what goes into our environment prior to it being there. So that's been very beneficial in my mind, to be able to control what applications are on our assets. We know what our application inventory is, and there is nothing that we haven't vetted or haven't approved prior to it being on a company asset.
Yep. And when we run into problems with a particular update or something, when generally it's a quick fix. If something breaks, we bring it in, we can run it through the VDI to see what was missed and update it from there. And it's generally, if an application is broke, we'll have it back up and running within minutes.
Yep. Actually, that's a really good segue into the built-ins. Dean, you touched on built-ins just briefly. The other benefit too, and we're trying not to trash another whitelisting company at all, but another company that does application whitelisting or application allow listing requires you to do all of the research on what hashes, what DLLs, what executables are allowed to run in that environment, where this solution, we actually provide what are called built-ins. Built-ins are basically the platform's classification of an executable, or of let's talk Windows updates, of an update that is predefined, so that you don't have to wait for maybe a week or two to run your Windows updates. Those updates have already been vetted, and they've already had policy, and the definitions for those executables have already been created. So, and I think, Andy, we've run into maybe one or two where they weren't quite all the way done, but for the most part, 99% of the time, all of your updates are going to deploy as normal, and it doesn't require you to go build out definitions for the application, or excuse me, for the update prior to its deployment.
Yeah, that would be so much added work that it wouldn't you wouldn't be able to use it. So it makes it's great that that part gets done behind the scenes ahead of time.
So I'm just echoing you guys. Why is that critical, folks? Because I mean, we're all patching all the time, and to take it to the ridiculous, let's say there's an update for Microsoft Word. So, well, first the update itself needs to be trusted, because it's not on the allow list. So again, the EZT manufacturer has that covered. And then it's going to change Outlook, right? So even if one bit in Word changes, it's no longer trusted, right? Its signature is changed, and a number of other things like that. So the EZT manufacturer has evaluated the update. They usually get them before public release, and have them learned and so forth. How is it going to affect Word? Here's what Word looks like, after the update. So like Caleb and Andy said, there's really no need for the customer, the end user, to go through a learning mode again. And Caleb, I talked to our good friend at the EZT manufacturer. The last I heard, there were like 4,500 applications that they took care of as far as, pre-learning and stuff like that. our resource at the manufacturer told me that it's up around 7,000 now.
I was going to say last time I talked to him, it was somewhere near 8,000. And they have a team dedicated to actually tracking those down. Yeah, they've got I don't remember, it's a 10-person team dedicated to tracking down not only all of the associated. Actually, I shouldn't say how many numbers because it's probably grown at this point. They hire very frequently. But there is a team dedicated to identifying all of the individual changes and all the individual binaries that go into those updates, those applications, and making sure that those curated lists are updated before you need them. So, I mean, as an end user, your interaction with this, if you're doing your day-to-day job without needing to add a new application that needs to be learned, you shouldn't run into it. And I'd add an anecdotal story for some of our network engineers. We've had a complaint, Andy. You know where I'm going with this, don't you? Changing IP addresses requires elevation, and Dean touched on this earlier. This is just a very simple and almost stupid illustration, but it highlights the power of the elevation. Our network engineers often have to change their IP address to a static address or something of that nature. For years, they've had to have a separate account, a separate set of credentials that they would use to change that address. What we've been able to do is define the DLL that controls the changing of IP addresses. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. And we've allowed that to automatically elevate without any user intervention. So that means that our network engineers that used to stop and go get a separate set of credentials to then elevate don't have to do that anymore. Those that dialog box for both Metro and in the control panel is automatically elevated the moment they need to go and change their IP address. That is, again, a very simple illustration. Dean, you used QuickBooks. That's also a valid illustration. I would use we have a number of users that use iTunes across our organization, and that would be another one where we've actually said, yeah, you can update iTunes. Andy doesn't need to have his team bothered when a member of our sales team needs to update iTunes because there's an update available. We've said that iTunes can be updated because we trust it. So not only is it protecting your environment, it's also reducing overhead, because now those people that have a separate set of credentials or don't have a separate set of credentials and would require an internal ticket or some user intervention from internal IT don't have to create that ticket or don't have to take that extra step. It's already approved and they can just move forward with their day.
Yeah, I guess you talked about approved, and we just hit on the workflow really quick where there's a full audit of that. But really any change that happens in your environment, in regards to executables, to files, man, the file audit is crazy. Like every file on your machine is audited, right? And then when it's touched or changed or created, it's like who, what, when, and where, and what app and what process touched it. And I remember, Caleb, when we were just testing the EZT platform was when Log4j happened. And I mean, we obviously took care of that through our SolarWinds and Orion and stuff, but just for giggles, we were kind of piloting EZT and we're like, hey, does Log4j exist anywhere else in the environment? And sure enough, we found a couple places. It was benign, but it was just, if you ask somebody else that just doesn't have visibility into like every file on their network, and you say, hey, where does this live? Like, good luck figuring that out. And, we knew it within, a matter of however long, 10 seconds it takes to run a query. I mean, I was impressed with that.
It was pretty nice to know that. And even the clients that we reached out to were like, hey, did you know that you've got this? They're like, nope, we should fix that.
Gotcha.
There were a couple that were benign, though. You're right, Dean.
Yeah.
There were a couple that was kind of like, we should probably do something about that. But again, to Dean's point earlier, we'd already defined what that application could do. So even if Log4Shell or Log4j was compromised, what's it going to do besides its job? Again, always patch. Don't take that as I don't need to patch. Always patch. If you have a vulnerability, fix the vulnerability. But you've reduced the urgency to patch, I think is probably the safest way to say that.
Yeah. Because Log4j would beacon out to the internet. Does it need to know that? No. It would spawn a JNDI process so it could speak to directory services. Does it need to do that? No, because it's not a regular, part of it. It's not within the guardrail, ring fence understood behavior of it. So yeah, I love the idea of buying time. And I think where EZT really shines, and we may not have enough time to explain this, is with zero trust. Right. And if you look at statistics, how do people get an initial foothold into your environment? It's usually because of some vulnerability in something. But if that bad actor gets in, and again they're putting a Metasploit or interpreter inside of an application, the signature of that app is going to change and it stops running. Period.
Yep.
Right. Because it's changed. And a bunch of other things like that. So I think it really shines in the case of 0 days.
So Dean, I kind of want to pivot a little bit. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about a whole lot of concepts. It sounds like a lot of work. Andy, we implemented this at High Point, and it does take a fair amount of work, especially if you're an IT company. But where I wanted to pivot to is what is our role in this, and how do we help you? And so the idea here is that at High Point, we have a number of engineers that are very, very fluent in this, and that number is continuing to grow. So we will handhold through the onboarding. We'll make sure that you get to a state where you are protected. All of your applications are learned, and then the one challenge that we have is it's very difficult for us as a co-managed provider to be able to identify who needs what application and when. And so our role is to consult and work to help build those policies as needed with your team to make sure that your users are protected. So additionally, our ongoing commitment is to look through what's occurring in your environment and make call outs when there are things that look maybe off or maybe require a policy or maybe things have changed, and we want to make sure that we're helping you identify where those changes are and make sure that we're not impacting your users, because the last thing that we want to do with a security product is inhibit your users in doing their job. So there's a bit more to unpack there, but that's a high level of how we can help. We've done this for thousands of endpoints, and I can't say hundreds of customers, tens of customers. We've probably got 20 or so that are doing this currently, and it continues to grow at a pretty rapid pace. It is, as Dean said earlier, it's a market disruptor. Gartner doesn't know what to do with them. They're not an EDR. They're not an MDR. They're not technically, by definition, a whitelisting tool. They're kind of in a category of their own, and they really don't have any competition at this point. I expect that to change in probably the relatively near future, but at this point they are a disruptor, and it's quite interesting to see just a different approach to security. I mean, we've seen EDR for years, I should say we've seen AV for years, became EDR, but it's really just the same approach with a different name, or maybe with some modifications or AI built in, looking at behaviors. But this is a whole different approach. This is moving from the detection side to the control side. And I think that's really important to call out, is instead of detecting activity, you're controlling the behavior and the activity.
Absolutely. And oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Dean. I have a question, and it doesn't matter which one of you answers this, but can you guys illustrate for the group what an attack looks like with this layer versus without this layer? Because I think that for me was like, whoa.
Yep.
Is an attack going to happen? Sure. Yes, likely. Right. And we know that we're not going to stop that. Right. We're going to do everything in our power to mitigate it. We're going to do everything in our power that it doesn't happen. But when it does, can you give me the difference? And it doesn't matter which one of you does, but can you give us the difference between what an attack looks like with this layer of added security versus without?
Yeah. Well, first thing is, never is not a word that exists in security vocabulary, unfortunately. So we actually have an illustration, a real world illustration, where this did actually save a client's bacon. A previously unknown piece of hardware existed. They thought that it had been decommissioned. It had a vulnerability. An attacker was able to exploit that vulnerability and gain access to the environment. The attacker spent 6 hours, and we actually have all this in screenshots. If you'd like to see it, I'd be happy to share that afterwards. But we have all this in screenshots of what they tried to do. They actually hammered on Windows for about 6 hours, multiple times, trying to trick the software into allowing it to run. They were renaming it to common EDRs, common executables. They tried to use TeamViewer. They tried to rename the files to TeamViewer and execute them that way. They tried to change from script extensions like .ps1 or .bat to executables, and basically, at the end of the day, it was all unsuccessful because we already have identified what the executable is by hash. We don't care what the name is. So I have, I think there's several pages of screenshots of where they tried to execute ransomware executables. They tried to drop persist. What do you call them? Persist. Why am I blanking?
Command and control, persistent remote
Yeah,
access. Or?
yeah, yep. And none of it actually worked. It was something that we were able to watch unfold in real time, and the Windows environment remained protected. So it was very interesting to see that. I don't know that we have it available for public release, do we, Brandy? I think that would be something we'd have to share on an individual engagement.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying, Caleb, I don't know what word you blast radius, the impact. Is the impact less? Like
yes.
They're not so without that layer, they could have moved laterally. Do I understand that correctly? And with this layer, we were able to mitigate or limit at a very significant level with maybe minimal impact. Obviously there was an attack that wasn't occurring, and I think that's something that's should be taken seriously. I'm not saying that,
for sure.
Is it reducing? Am I hearing that right?
Correct. So the whole every protected OS was untouched. There was no ransomware that was allowed to execute. There were no rats that were allowed to persist. There was no foothold gained on protected endpoints because it was all binaries, executables, hashes that were not allowed. So it didn't matter how they tried to trick it. There was no detonation. There was no detonation whatsoever because it's impossible. Allow what you know, deny everything else.
Down to the file control, I mean, the bad actors always go after the backups like we've talked about, but what if you only gave your backup solution, Veeam, the ability to communicate with the Veeam backup files, right? So in other words, now PowerShell can't touch them, now, command.com can't, interpreter can't, that's just one example of protection. Elevation comes into play, network control comes into the play. So that, just from a network perspective, there's no lateral movement, even if a credential gets taken care of. So allow listing, hopefully the thing just flat out isn't going to run. If it does get a foothold, the application that it's within, is highly ring fenced. The storage control is in place. And Caleb, I might be exaggerating here, so hold me to the truth. But I think you can set like a threshold on the storage control where, like, if end user or application changes 100 files within 10 seconds or something like that, like kill the process.
Not in the native platform. That's a new solution or new feature that's coming. I've gotten to see it. I've gotten to play with it, but it's not something that's currently available at this moment. It needs a little bit more time to bake.
Gotcha.
So that's a different solution.
Is like if a bunch of files start encrypting, stop the process. So Okay, didn't mean to
Yep,
exaggerate
they're
there.
they're getting into that space, but currently, what we're talking about here is the application control side. That is something that they are working on, though.
Thanks for holding us honest.
Yeah. Oh, I had a thought and I lost it. Wasn't important.
I don't know about that. Now,
Oh, I was gonna give you a hard time because you were touching on my systems engineering background. Your backups are isolated from your production environment, right?
always, not always. We gotta have that immutable storage as well. It's something that we
Yes.
can help you out with now. There's a number of nuances that we haven't touched on today. There's a community around the EZT platform. So, for example, when Log4j comes out or the CrowdStrike thing that just happened and whatnot, I mean, there's built-in, or not built-in, there's suggested policies and so forth in the community. So the community is very active as well. So I think the best thing is, if you want to see more of these nuances, especially the user interface, the unified audit and the way it can be queried and things like that is to give myself and Caleb and the smart services team a call so you can actually see it and kick the tires. And Caleb, I think there might actually, hold me truthful here, might be a possibility to actually do a pilot in environments. Is that right? Okay.
Yep, we do have a pilot available. You can have up to 10 endpoints for 30 days. The 30 days is kind of a soft limit. Your account manager can help you go further if we need to for any reason. There are some limitations. We do have some terms and conditions, waiving some liability. I mean, if you're demoing something and you have an incident, we can't be responsible for it. But there are some terms and conditions. Your account manager can help you out with that, and be happy to talk through and actually demo this and let you see what it looks like in real time.
Gotcha. Now, in the spirit of spilling the beans, I think everybody can tell that Andy has like no patience for BS. So, Andy, did we say anything today that we over embellished or promised too much of, or are we pretty much straightforward with folks today?
No, that's been our experience. I mean, it does what it says it's going to do, and it does a pretty good job at doing it.
Yeah.
I feel a lot better about our environment since we've got it set up and deployed.
Yeah. I guess I would say one last thing that really impressed me is that the solution can't be stopped, knocked over, manipulated. The policies can't be changed. Even if the end user is domain admin, local admin, or system, the stuff just flat out persists no matter who you are. It's almost like the protection. This may be too strong of a word, but is authoritative in regards to all of that, and that wildly impressed me. Yeah. Okay, well, folks, this may be the longest beans we've ever done. I guess
Sorry.
we'll open it up for a Q&A, and please know that this discussion always continues. You can email marketing@highpointnetworks.com for questions that'll get routed to us. Brandy promises that they won't spam you as a result of getting your email address. That's not how we roll. But while we're all here, any questions, comments, suggestions, anything like that? Just open it up to the floor.
I don't see any in the chat, so if someone has a question, they can certainly unmute or place it in the chat.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, please, schedule a call with us. It's, we're here to be a servant for you. We're here to be an advocate for you. If we ever have to get the third party involved or whatnot, something like this may be the right thing for you. It may not be, right? But we can definitely help you through that discussion. And if it's not the right thing, then maybe the conversation stops, or maybe we can, suggest something else. So yeah, we're here to serve you guys. So Caleb, Andy, anything else?
I think as a last thought is as you're looking for places to potentially gain some time on your team, not having to deal with end users requests using elevation control and being able to control what applications exist in your environment is peace of mind and both a time saver and also a time saver. You don't have to worry about shadow IT. You're not having to worry about who's downloading Nursoft and giving nation states access to their machine unbeknownst to you. It's just it's a peace of mind, and we have seen a lot of clients get time back on their teams. So that's been, I can't tell you the time investment is zero, but it is low after you've got it configured and set up.
And obviously the policies persist, if you go off network, you don't need line of sight like you do with some EDR solutions. And then the EZT manufacturer has nice mappings of the EZT product in regards to frameworks, like CMMC, NIST, 171, I guess it's the same thing, CIS, PCI, so forth. And then insurance obligations as well. There's some mappings to that. So if that helps you out in any way, we can certainly provide those. So Caleb, Andy, I think that's all I have to say. Are you guys good?
Yep.
Good.
Okay, awesome. Do my little heart sign. Brandy, hand it over to you for closing.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody that's stayed on this call. I think this is such an important subject. So I appreciate your time. I know we went over. So genuinely from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate your time. Dean, Caleb, and Andy, I love you all with my whole heart. And I appreciate you guys being here, being willing to have this real conversation, because I do think it's something that is super impactful and much needed. So bless you all. Have a great day, and we will see you on the next Spilling the Beans.
That's good. Thanks, everyone.